Welcome everyone to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving into what is honestly an incredibly dense but absolutely rewarding academic topic. We're tackling Tema 28, complex syntax. Specifically, we're looking at the syntactic expression of cause, consequence, and purpose. Now, if you're a future English teacher, especially if you're gunning for that permanent C2 level position at the Escuela Oficial de Idiomas en Aragon, this masterclass is exactly where you need to be. We're going to unpack these structural mechanics together and turn some pretty heavy linguistic theory into clear, actionable knowledge you can actually use.
Okay, let's dive into this syllabus and map out our journey. We'll start with the functions of subordinate clauses, then tackle the big one, adjuncts versus disjuncts. From there, we'll systematically break down the expression of cause, purpose, and result. Finally, we'll wrap up with the pedagogical implications for your classrooms.
But before we really get going, we need to establish our academic foundation. Every single thing we discuss today is built entirely on the frameworks of some serious heavyweights in grammar. We're talking Quirk and Greenbaum's definitive 1985 comprehensive grammar, Huddleston, Bieber's corpus-based insights, Carter and McCarthy, and of course, Swan's incredibly practical usage guides, literally the gold standard of English syntax. We are absolutely standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Section 1. Functions of subordinate clauses, moving beyond simple coordination. You know, the common European framework of reference is brutally clear on this. When you hit C2 proficiency, relying on simple coordination with and or but just won't cut it anymore. To construct truly sophisticated arguments, you really have to teach your students that subordinate clauses aren't just, optional little appendages tacked onto the end of a sentence. They are structural pillars. They step in to function directly as subjects, complements, or adverbials right inside a larger superordinate matrix clause. It's like upgrading from basic building blocks to complex architecture.
Let's move to and see how this builds into four major syntactic categories. We've got nominal clauses acting just like noun phrases. We have relative clauses, which modify noun phrases kind of like attributive adjectives. Comparative clauses act as degree adverbs. And finally, adverbial clauses. Now, for the rest of this explainer, we are going to be heavily locked onto that adverbial category because, well, that's the primary vehicle for expressing cause, purpose, and result.
Section 2. Adjuncts versus disjuncts, the core syntactic distinction. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark visual contrast, because if you take just one foundational concept away from today, it has to be this one. Adjuncts are central. They tell us about the actual real-world circumstances of the main clause, like the time it happened or the direct cause. And because they're so central, you can actually test for them using a cleft sentence. So you can say, it's because they are helpful that he likes them. It works perfectly. Disjuncts, on the other hand, they are completely peripheral. They're more like a meta-commentary on the speech act itself, or the speaker's personal attitude. Because they sit outside the core meaning, they fail the cleft sentence test completely. You absolutely cannot say, it's since they are helpful that he likes them. No way. It just completely breaks the syntax.
Section 3. Expression of cause. Analyzing reason clauses.
So, when we talk about direct reason relationships, which, remember, function as those central adjuncts we just talked about, we're looking at the exact why of the situation in the main clause, and there are four specific subtypes here. First, cause and effect, which is totally objective. Think of, the flowers grew because I watered them. It's just a fact. Then we have reason and consequence, which relies much more on the speaker's own inference. Next up is motivation and result, and this one specifically involves the intention of an animate being, someone actually deciding to do something. And finally, circumstances and consequence, which basically combines a reason with a fulfilled condition, like, since the weather improved, the game will be held. But wait, then we get into indirect reason, and this is where it gets incredibly cool. Consider this sentence. Percy is in Washington, for he phoned me from there. Think about that for a second. The phone call is obviously not the literal cause of Percy magically teleporting to Washington, right? Actually, the phone call is the reason the speaker knows he's there. The clause motivates the speech act itself, the fact that I'm telling you this, not the physical event of him traveling. Spotting that difference? That is a hallmark C2 level distinction right there.
And it's wild how the subordinator you choose completely, radically alters the register and the subtle meaning of the whole sentence. Because is your workhorse. It gives you direct cause. But the second you shift to since, or as, you're suddenly framing the reason as something the listener already knows. It's a completely different vibe. Use for, and you elevate the formality significantly, usually to formally justify an action. In case, brings in a sense of contingency, doing something just to be safe. And in that introduces a highly formal, very specific viewpoint. It's like having different microscopic lenses for your sentences.
Section 4. Expression of purpose, intended results, and finality.
So the crucial point is understanding this word right here, putative. Purpose clauses describe intended results, not hard facts. They describe a potential state or a desired outcome that hasn't actually happened yet. And because it's only potential, English grammar dictates that you absolutely must use a modal auxiliary in a finite purpose clause. That's the secret key. Words like can, could, may, might, should, or would, they are totally non-negotiable if you want to express purpose accurately. Now, what happens if we add negation? Well, it introduces a whole new layer of complexity. Negative purpose requires very specific syntactic structures. For non-finite clauses, we typically use so as not to. Pretty standard. But for finite negative purpose, this is where C2 English often employs those beautiful, slightly archaic forms like lest or for fear that. And because these inherently express a putative apprehension, a fear of something bad that might happen, they strictly require modals to really emphasize that feeling of apprehension. It sounds so sophisticated when used correctly.
Section 5. Expression of result, the consequences of action.
I want you to look really closely at how this comparison changes absolutely everything. In the first sentence, we have purpose. We paid him immediately so that he would leave contented. The modal would has to be there because his leaving is putative. It's our intention, but it's not guaranteed. But look at the second sentence, the result clause. We paid him immediately so that he left contented. See the difference? The consequence actually happened. It's a done deal. It is completely factual. Therefore, the modal auxiliary just drops out entirely and we fall back to a simple past tense verb. It's such a tiny shift, but syntactically, it's massive. And beyond just dropping the modal, result clauses play by some incredibly strict syntactic rules. Remember that adjunct versus disjunct distinction from earlier? Well, result clauses function as disjuncts, unlike purpose clauses, which are adjuncts. Result clauses are also rigidly restricted to the absolute final position in a sentence. You cannot move them to the front. And perhaps most importantly, especially for your C2 candidates taking written exams, they are typically separated from the main clause by a comma. I can't stress this enough. That tiny comma before so that is a massive pitfall. It is the punctuation mark that perfectly distinguishes a factual result from a putative purpose. Oh, and you'll also see them heavily utilize intensifying correlatives, like so that and such that.
Section 6. Pedagogical implications, from theory to the EOI classroom. Okay, we've gone really deep into the academic theory today, but how does this actually translate directly to your EOI classroom? Why does this matter? Well, the reality is that equipping your students with these exact syntactic tools is exactly how you push learners past that dreaded intermediate plateau. When you show a student that simply choosing since over because alters the entire register of their essay, or when you prove to them that dropping a modal auxiliary shifts a sentence from a hopeful intention to a hard, indisputable fact, you're giving them absolute precision. You aren't just teaching grammar rules anymore, you are literally giving them the structural mechanics of advanced thought.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. How will you integrate these incredibly nuanced syntactic distinctions into your own C2 level curriculum? How are you going to take the abstract concept of a disjunct, or that absolutely critical comma placement in a so that clause, and use it to practically elevate your students' writing? Master these mechanisms yourself, and I promise you, your students will undoubtedly follow. Thanks so much for exploring this deep dive into English syntax with me.